A gash cut into the bark of a tree. The incision is deliberate, not to harm but to collect. A bead of resin gathers at the wound. Golden red, viscous. In a few days it will harden into a nodule the size of a thumbnail, brittle, translucent, smelling of the desert and something older. This resin appears 3 times in the Gospels: at a birth, at an execution, at a burial. Each appearance is specific, each pharmacologically precise, corresponding to something this tree actually does that modern chemistry has since confirmed. The ancients were not prophesying future science, they were recording what they already knew. The resin is myrrh, in Hebrew, more. The Brown Driver Briggs lexicon traces the word to its root: bitter. Bitter as in taste, bitter as in function. An astringent, wound-sealing compound the tree itself produces in response to injury. For 3,000 years, from Egyptian papyri to 1st century Jerusalem, human hands applied that same biology to their own wounds. The Magi brought it to a child. Roman soldiers offered it at a cross. A Pharisee carried it to a tomb. Modern chemistry has since done one thing the ancients hadn't. It named the molecules, the tree itself, Commiphora myrrha, or possibly Commiphora abyssinica, depending on which botanist you trust. Michael Zohari, whose 1982 Cambridge study plants of the Bible remains a standard reference, identified the biblical Moor primarily with C. abyssinica, native to the Ethiopian highlands and the Somali coast. F. Nigel Hepper, in the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Bible Plants, favors C. myrrha. Both are small, thorny, dry-adapted trees of the Berzeraceae family. Here is where the species debate becomes less important than the chemistry both species share. The resin is produced in response to wounding. The bark is cut. The tree bleeds this compound. The wound closes. This is not incidental. Myrrh is the tree's own wound response chemistry. The same compound the tree uses to seal damaged bark against pathogens and moisture loss is the compound the ancient world recognized as a wound healer for human tissue. The observation was correct. The mechanism they lacked words for, modern pharmacology has since named. From the Horn of Africa and the Dhofar coast of Oman, the resin traveled north along what Nigel Groom, in his 1981 study Frankincense and Myrrh, documented as the Incense Road. Dhofar to Hadramaut, west through Shabwa, north through the Nabatean capital of Petra, the carved sandstone city that grew rich, controlling every caravan that passed. West to Gaza, then on to the Mediterranean world. 2,400 kilometers of desert track, with Nabatean traders extracting tolls at every narrowing of the route. Pliny the Elder recorded what the Roman market paid. Writing in Natural History Book 12, he gives the price in denarii per pound. Cultivated myrrh at 11 denarii at its cheapest, staiete, the resin that flows without tapping, the finest grade, at 40. A Roman soldier earned roughly 1 denarius a day. The finest myrrh cost a month's wages per pound. This was not a perfume. It was medicine, the most concentrated wound-sealing, antimicrobial compound the ancient pharmacopoeia possessed, priced accordingly. The first time myrrh appears in biblical text is not at a birth or a burial. It appears in Exodus 30, verse 23. The formula for the holy anointing oil of the priests: 500 shekels of more dror, free-flowing myrrh leading the recipe, 250 shekels of cinnamon, 250 of aromatic cane, 500 of cassia. Myrrh opens the list by weight and by priority. The compound used to anoint the tabernacle, the priests, and every ritual object of the priesthood. The ancient Hebrews knew what this substance was. So did the Magi. Matthew 2, verse 11. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. 3 gifts, 3 distinct registers. The interpretive tradition that hardened after Matthew wanted these gifts to signify gold for kingship, frankincense for divinity, myrrh for death. Origen of Alexandria, in Contra Celsum written around 248 CE, articulates the patristic reading directly. Gold as to a king, myrrh as to one who was mortal, and incense as to a god. This became the settled interpretation, repeated in homilies, carved into iconography, embedded so deeply that most people still assume it is simply what the text says. Raymond E. Brown, in The Birth of the Messiah, pushed back with care. He observed that myrrh's primary register in the Hebrew Bible is not funeral but erotic luxury. Esther 2, verse 12. 6 months of oil of myrrh in the Persian royal purification before a woman approached the king. Psalm 45, 8. Myrrh and aloes, perfuming the Davidic king's garments from the ivory palaces. Proverbs 7, verse 17. The adulteress who perfumed her bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Song of Songs repeatedly, where myrrh is the scent of the beloved. Brown's conclusion: the death foreshadowing reading is a patristic reading, imposed retroactively from John 19 backward onto Matthew 2. The first-century reader encountering the Magi's 3 gifts would have understood myrrh as a luxury commodity, royal, pharmaceutical, recognized, not as a premonition of what was coming. What neither reading disputes is what myrrh was. Dioscorides, the Greek military physician writing around 50 CE, catalogued its indications in Demateria Medica: wound healing astringent, stems blood flow, keeps tissue clean, treats chronic coughs and eye infections, oral antiseptic when dissolved in wine. This is the substance the Magi were carrying, not a symbol. A pharmaceutical, the most valued wound-healing resin in the ancient world. Matthew's choice of myrrh over Isaiah's shortlist is worth noting. Isaiah 66, the passage Matthew draws on for the Magi scene, names only gold and frankincense arriving from Sheba. No myrrh. Matthew adds it. The addition pulls in Psalm 45:8, the Davidic king's garments perfumed with myrrh and aloes and cassia, a composite messianic fulfillment. Isaiah's tribute caravans and the Davidic royal anointing bound into one scene. The pharmacist's substance added to the king's tribute. The healer's resin carried across desert roads to a house in Bethlehem. If you'd like to spend more time in this history, subscribe. What follows is the darkest chapter of the story. Mark 15, verse 23. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh. He did not take it. That single verse carries 3 layers that have to be separated before any of them can be understood. The first, the compound itself. Esmyrnismenon oinon. Wine myrrh-loaded. Wine in which myrrh resin has been dissolved. Matthew's parallel account in 27:34 alters the recipe. His version gives wine mixed with gall. Gundry, in his Eerdmans commentary on Mark, identifies Matthew's change as deliberate theological editing. Gall aligns the scene with Psalm 69:21. They gave me poison for food, and for my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. Matthew is writing fulfillment. Mark is writing chemistry. Mark's text is historically earlier and more specific, and the specificity is what matters here. The second layer, who offered it? Not compassionate women of Jerusalem. Mark's text is clear. It was Roman soldiers. A popular interpretation of this scene invokes Bavli Sanhedrin 43a, a Talmudic passage describing an analgesic drink given to those condemned to execution. The one who was going to be killed, they used to give a grain in a cup of wine to drink in order to benumb his senses. This looks like it should explain Mark's myrrhed wine, but the substance in Sanhedrin 43a is levona, frankincense, not myrrh. The 2 texts describe 2 different substances administered in 2 different contexts by 2 different groups. They cannot be conflated without contradiction. What the soldiers were doing, Gundry proposes, was mockery. Roman mockery of a royal title. At the climax of a Roman military triumph, the victorious general received spiced wine, luxury wine, the drink of conquerors. The soldiers at Golgotha had already dressed Jesus in a scarlet robe and a crown of thorns and greeted him as king. The cup of myrrh wine fits the pattern. Here is your triumph, King of the Jews. The bitter, kingly drink. He tasted it and refused. The third layer. Why the refusal? Mark offers nothing. He did not take it. Two readings have persisted without resolution. The first is pharmacological. Myrrh at the concentration needed to have analgesic effect is profoundly bitter. The bitterness is not incidental. It is produced by the same sesquiterpene compounds that carry the biological activity. A dose high enough to matter would make wine barely drinkable. He tasted the bitterness and stopped. The second reading is volitional. He chose to remain in full possession of his faculties to the end. Both are defensible from the text. Neither is extractable from it. What the pharmacology can tell us is this: the cup would have worked. In 1996, a team at the University of Florence published a short letter in Nature. Dollara, Luceri, Ghelardini, and colleagues, demonstrating that sesquiterpene fractions isolated from myrrh resin produced dose-dependent analgesia in mice. Pre-treatment with naloxone, the opioid antagonist, completely abolished the effect. The mechanism is opioid receptor mediated, specifically the delta receptor subtype. The active compound is furanudesma 1,3-diene, which constitutes roughly a third to 40% of myrrh's volatile oil. A second mechanism, identified by the same group in 2000 and published in Planta Medica, involves voltage-gated sodium channel blockade, a local anesthetic effect analogous to lidocaine. The vehicle matters. Wine at 10 to 15% ethanol is the pharmacologically correct solvent for these sesquiterpenes. They are highly lipophilic, essentially insoluble in water, but soluble in alcohol. An aqueous extraction delivers almost nothing biologically active. Wine dissolved them. This is not coincidence. Whoever mixed that cup understood that resin requires alcohol to work. This evidence is preclinical, established in rodent models, not in a human pain trial. The mechanism is real. The evidence ceiling is real. What the text records is a pharmacologically active compound in the correct solvent offered in a situation where analgesic effect was the only rational purpose, regardless of whether the offer was mercy or mockery. He tasted it and did not take it. The crucifixion ends at 3 in the afternoon. By sunset, before the Sabbath makes burial preparations unlawful, Nicodemus arrives at the tomb. John 19:39 identifies him with a detail only John records: the one who had come to Jesus by night, the first time, the Pharisee who sought him out after dark, unwilling or unable to be seen. Now he comes at dusk, openly, carrying something, a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 Roman pounds, 100 litras, approximately 32.7 kilograms. 72 pounds in modern weight. The scale requires attention. Standard first-century Jewish burial practice required nothing like this. The Mishnah's discussions of burial describe modest preparation, linen wrappings, spices to mask decomposition odor, basic preparation done before the Sabbath. What Nicodemus carried was not standard burial supplies scaled up. Raymond Brown and Craig Keener, commenting on John's characteristic excess, the 600 liters of wine at Cana, the 153 fish of the resurrection shore, both observe that John uses large numbers as theological statements about royal honor. Nicodemus was burying a king. The 100 pounds was the declaration. The second compound requires more careful reading than it usually receives. The Greek is aloe, transliterated directly into English as aloes, which modern readers immediately map to aloe vera, the succulent. This mapping is almost certainly wrong. The BDAG lexicon, the standard Greek-English lexicon for New Testament scholarship, specifies that the New Testament aloe is an aromatic substance apparently derived from what is known as eaglewood. Aquilaria agalocha, agar wood, oud wood. A resinous heartwood imported from Southeast Asia, the same substance as the ahalim of the Hebrew Bible, the perfumed wood of Psalm 45:8, the scented bed of Proverbs 7:17. Aromatic, dry, traded at enormous cost across the Indian Ocean trade routes to the Mediterranean world. Daphne and Bach, in their 2019 review in the Journal of Ethnobiology and Ethnomedicine, confirmed that the Hebrew and Greek botanical vocabulary for ligan aloes consistently points to Aquilaria in every Old Testament context. Consider the practical question: would Nicodemus have carried 32 kilograms of fresh, succulent leaves? Aloe vera is 98% water through the streets of Jerusalem in the hour before Sabbath. Agar wood is a dry, aromatic resin, compact and stable, paired with myrrh in precisely this kind of ritual context across multiple ancient cultures. The pharmacology of myrrh in this context is real. The peer-reviewed literature, post-2015, establishes significant antibacterial activity against MRSA at a minimum inhibitory concentration of 0.50 milligrams per milliliter, against Staphylococcus aureus, against Escherichia coli, against Candida albicans. In scratch assay experiments, myrrh extract promoted 98.4% fibroblast closure at 72 hours. In rat excision wound models, collagen deposition, measured by hydroxyproline content, increased by a factor of 2.2. The anti-inflammatory mechanism proceeds through NF-kappa B pathway inhibition and JNK pathway suppression in macrophage studies. A caution is required here, and the documentary scholarship demands it be voiced. This is in vitro data. Minimum inhibitory concentrations measured in laboratory-cultured bacterial strains in nutrient broth at 37 degrees Celsius. One study found that bactericidal activity drops substantially below 25 degrees, directly relevant to a limestone tomb in Judea in early spring. The extrapolation from those MMIC values to 32 kilograms of myrrh preserved a body is not supported by any forensic decomposition study. The pharmacology is real. The preservation claim is an inference, a reasonable one, given what we know, but an inference. What is not an inference? Nicodemus applied the most potent antimicrobial resin the ancient world possessed, at the scale appropriate for a king, to a body he clearly believed deserved a king's burial. The chemistry was doing something. Modern pharmacology has measured what it does. The distance between a laboratory assay and a tomb remains a distance. Modern pharmacology arrived late to a conversation that had been running for 3,000 years. The volatile oil of Commiphora Myrrh resin is, by GCMS analysis, approximately 87 to 88% furanose-sesquiterpenes. Furanudesma 1,3-diene, the compound Dolara, and colleagues isolated as the opioid active fraction in 1996, makes up roughly a third to 40% of that oil. Curzarine contributes 25 to 40%. Lindestrain roughly 12 to 14. These are the molecules that carry the wound-healing, analgesic, and antimicrobial properties the ancient world observed without being able to name. Yang and colleagues, in a 2024 comprehensive review in pharmaceuticals, and Batiha and colleagues in a 2023 review in Naunin Schmiedeberg's Archives of Pharmacology, document the full spectrum of that activity. A caveat the documentary must name: only 8% of commercial samples sold as Myrrh today are Commiphora Myrrha in the strict Linnaean sense, by DNA barcoding. 88% are Commiphora gileadensis. The ancient market category myrrh, the Hebrew more, the Greek Smyrna, was a commodity label, not a species label. What traders and physicians and magi and priests were working with was a Furanose-sesquiterpene-rich Commiphora resin complex, not a Linnaean specimen. The pharmacological properties hold across the genus. The species-level precision does not. Modern chemistry has confirmed the wound healing mechanism: fibroblast migration, collagen deposition, NF-kappa, B suppression. It has confirmed the analgesic mechanism in preclinical models: opioid receptor modulation, voltage-gated sodium channel blockade. It has confirmed the antimicrobial spectrum, MRSA, gram-negative pathogens, fungi. What it has not yet confirmed, despite the assumption embedded in centuries of scholarly commentary, is that myrrh resin was a constituent of ancient Egyptian mummy embalming preparations. The 2023 Nature study of the Saqqara embalming workshop by Raggio and colleagues found that vessels inscribed with Antiu, traditionally translated as myrrh, contained cedar and juniper tar and animal fat. Not Commiphora. The archaeochemistry does not yet confirm what the textual tradition assumes. This is not a refutation of anything the Gospels record. It is an honest statement of what the evidence supports and what it does not. The trade in myrrh was real. The pharmacology is real. The three appearances in the Gospels correspond to three genuine functions the plant possesses. What modern science has added is the mechanism. It has named the molecules. It has measured the receptors and the MIC values and the scratch assay closure rates. The tree heals its own wounds with this resin. Cut the bark. The resin flows. The wound closes. For 3,000 years, from the Incense Road to the priestly oil of the tabernacle, to the Magi's treasury, to the tomb outside Jerusalem, that observation drove commerce and ritual and medicine. Three appearances in one life. Three pharmacological functions the plant actually possesses: the manger, the cross, the burial cave. And modern chemistry, which arrived in this particular room about 30 years ago, has done exactly one new thing. It named Furanudesma 1, 3-DNA. It gave the mechanism a label. The observation itself is 3,000 years old. The Magi already knew which bottle to bring. If you'd like to spend more time in this history, subscribe.